Hey there, welcome to Cancel This. I'm your host, Angelo Isidoro, and today I'm going to be speaking to Meghan Murphy. She's a writer, political commentator, and mostly she's known as a feminist, or a TERF. That's a trans exclusionary radical feminist. It's a big new term. She is someone who's been really entangled in this culture war in North America, and she finds herself in an interesting position, which is not necessarily coming from the right, but someone who likely considers themselves to be a liberal. So that insight's really interesting to me. She is the subject of controversy, but who isn't, basically? I mean, she's on the right podcast for that, and honestly, it makes me want to speak to her more, just so I can find out what's going on. I've always wanted to speak to her. We're in the same city. I've seen her events. I've seen the protests for her events, and I just think it's really fascinating to speak to a woman who is a feminist, who's standing up for women, but is doing it in her own way. So I think she's someone really fascinating. She has her own podcast called The Same Drugs, which you should check out after this. And with that said, please give this a listen and let me know your thoughts. Hey, Meghan Murphy, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to finally have you on. Like, we've known each other peripherally, but we haven't gotten a chance to actually sit down and talk about stuff. And I think you're someone that's interesting because you come at this cancel culture thing from a pretty different perspective than I'm used to, where like my background is all these, stuck up conservatives basically. And you sort of led the charge, at least in Canada, for feminists being, free speech activists at the same time. And there's this big war between the TERFs and the whoever and everything. So I'm glad to have you on. I'm glad to basically ask you a bunch of questions. And I guess first I wanted to start sort of broad, and this might be a stupid question, but how do you feel things are going right now in terms of the cancel culture movement? Do you think like we're making progress to putting an end to this, or is it getting worse?
I think people are getting really sick of it. So I think in terms of like the general public, the individual, the citizen, I think that people are over it. People who maybe even were on board at some point thinking, like these people are saying bad things. These people are doing terrible things. Like clearly we should squash them. I think it's just, it's overkill, right? Like it's almost a joke at this point. And the problem is that I think that as far as institutions go, things are not improving. So I think in academia, in politics, things like that, even, in science, researchers are getting canceled, professors are getting canceled. And I think that's quite serious because it's becoming institutionalized and sort of regulated, and in media, of course, I should mention, in media, it's terrible, especially in Canada. If we look at, places like the CBC and any real mainstream news media outlet in Canada, I mean, cancel culture has ensured that the media is so biased. There's no real reporting being done. There's no real truth. There's no fair reporting. And people are scared. I've talked to reporters who work in mainstream media and have worked in mainstream media for a really long time, and they're afraid to say anything. They're afraid to even interview certain individuals, people like me, for example. They'll get canceled for speaking to me, for actually doing their jobs properly and trying to actually report on a story and, cover the various sides of a debate. And, they're not doing that. I mean, I've essentially stopped listening to the CBC because it's intolerable and you just can't trust them anymore. I mean, they've destroyed trust in the media and in the news. So the effect of that is that everybody becomes conspiracy theorists. Everybody becomes the meme shouting fake news. But it's because we know you're not doing your job, and we've lost trust for good reason, and that just means that we don't believe what any of you said. Hopefully the result is that you go do your own individual research and you actually do good research, but maybe you don't. Maybe you just find stuff on Facebook or on Reddit. And, not to say that there's not useful information on Facebook and Reddit, but often, that information isn't necessarily any better either. And you come up with your own story. But so, yeah, because of what's happening in institutions, it seems like cancel culture is getting worse. But I do see a notable backlash from the public. And you see comedians speaking out about it and things like that, which is good, which means that the backlash is going more mainstream.
Yeah. Well, not only comedians, but I think you are seeing people who lean more left, right? Like there was that famous letter that a bunch of progressives sent to I think, Harper's Magazine. Um, Even just the other day, John Cleese was sort of attacked for supporting J.K. Rowling. And he basically just told everyone to fuck off. And he is someone who's basically completely liberal, as far as I can tell. He like hates Trump and everything. So it does seem like it's shifting. So you're right. It feels like more people are sort of done with it. At the same time, there's still that bullying in media where you mentioned this in your article in The Spectator, where there's this teenage kid who writes an op-ed about how much he loves Joe Rogan. Completely innocuous. Like, I'm sure you've read it. It's a totally innocuous op-ed, I think, in the Globe and Mail. And then I think they did a response to it, and you had all these journalists that have been journalists for like 10, 15 years going after this 19-year-old kid who just wanted to write an op-ed. So you're right in both ways, that in some ways more normal people, comedians, people who maybe consider themselves liberals, are done with it. But at the same time, there's this hardcore bullying going on.
Yeah, and I mean, Canada is a very woke, especially in terms of arts and culture and media, and politics. But also, we're a culture of very polite people who are afraid of conflict and afraid of controversy. And we'd prefer to just say the nice thing or the politically correct thing, and therefore, get along with everyone, not cause any trouble, not get into any arguments, not feel uncomfortable, than to challenge or tell the truth or to debate or whatever. So while, the tide might be turning more broadly in the UK, in the US, in certain contexts, again, not in all contexts, in Canada, we don't seem to be doing quite as well on that front.
Do you ever have people who, you mentioned journalists before, and this is why I ask this. Do you ever have people, whether they're supporters or acquaintances or whatever, who may email you or message you privately and say, I love everything you're doing, I agree with you 100%, but I can't be public about it? And I can't be seen with you, or it would ruin my life, but I agree with you. I want you to know privately that I agree with you. Have you gotten those sort of responses to your activism?
Oh, constantly. I mean, I get emails and messages from strangers who say things like that, but my friends tell me that all the time.
Does it piss you
You
off?
know, it doesn't necessarily, I understand why there are some people who can't speak out publicly about certain issues because of their job. That's sort of like the one excuse I feel is valid. Like, if you're literally going to lose your job if you say something publicly, then I understand why you might not want to. I mean, at the same time, I have lost work and lost income and lost jobs for speaking out about things that I believe in. So it's hard for me to be completely sympathetic because we all take risks. There's different level of risk, but I take enormous risks, and I would argue that anybody who speaks out about, taboo subjects, in my case, it was, primarily the gender identity issue, the issue of trans activism. But I've spoken about many other things that have gotten me in a lot of trouble. I've been canceled now more times than I can count. But, yeah, it pisses me off. It pisses me off a lot when it's people who are close to me, because I feel like, why are you telling me this? Like, why are you wasting my time sending me a message saying, like, hey Megan, like I really support what you're doing, but like I just so you know, I can't like any of your posts on Facebook. I'm like, okay, then I don't know, why are you telling me? Like I appreciate messages of support, but what's going to happen to you if you like my post on Facebook or you share this article? Are you, I mean, the reality is that most people are afraid of social backlash. People are afraid of what their friends will think. And people don't want to get in arguments on social media, which is like fair enough, because I hate arguments on, like, I don't even want to post my stuff on social media. Like I have to because it's my job, and I'm, like an independent writer, journalist, media producer. So I'm wholly responsible for getting my work out there and trying to make an income from that. So I have to, but I hate it. I hate Facebook. I don't want to argue with people on Facebook. I don't want to hear from, 1,000 commenters who are going to, call me names and misrepresent my arguments over and over and over again. It's exhausting. At the same time, like I end up feeling thrown under the bus when people respond to me in that way. I've had like boyfriends say, in the past, say, oh, well, like, I can't bring you here because so-and-so is here and they don't like you. And it's like, grow some balls, man. Like, like I'm the one putting my neck out, not you. Like, I don't care what these people think. I'm not afraid of them. And I'm honestly, it really doesn't bother me to be in places, at parties, at events with people who don't like me or disagree with me. I mean, who cares? How does that affect me? I mean, am I moving about life thinking that everyone agrees with me and likes me? It doesn't affect me. I can still be polite. We don't have to be best friends. Oh well. But it ends up feeling sort of like, what is so important about you? Why is your comfort more important than my comfort, or more important than the comfort of whomever or whatever, whomever I'm standing up for? Because at the end of the day, when I'm speaking out about certain issues, it's because I have genuine, very serious concerns about how those issues impact real people and how those issues impact society. I don't bother speaking up about things unless I really believe that those things matter. I don't have anything to gain from that. And I do it because I care. And so to me, when people tell me those things, it just tells me that you care more about yourself than you do anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you care more about yourself than the well-being of society. You care more about yourself than doing what's right and ethical. And to me, I can't not say something. If it matters that much, if it's, something that's so harmful and so unethical and so dangerous, I'm going to say something. I have to say something. I can't not. And it's hard for me to relate to people who don't feel that way.
Well, I think, to your point, there's a lot of people, especially in Canada, that feel that way because we are a more passive culture. Call it politeness, call it being passive. But I asked you the question because, like, I've had a similar thing happen, obviously not to your degree, but I've had professors email me and say, I support the free speech thing and this and that, but I can't be public about it. And after you get like 1,000 messages, you begin to wonder whether we're all walking on eggshells over 7 really loud people that will try to ruin your life, because it does feel like the majority of the population agrees with you, but the majority of the population is too afraid to do anything. And I mean, when it comes down to it, I think you're someone who takes action in the world. Like, I've been to your events where there's like, 300-400 crazy, cabal protesters outside. And, some of them have, I'm sure you remember, like, cardboard guillotines and like just nuts, like totally crazy stuff. But you like totally remain unfazed by it. Where do you think that comes from? Do you think you're just, do you think certain people are just wired that way, where they're missing the part of their brain that should be polite and passive? Like where does that come from for you?
I don't know. I mean, people do ask me this, and I've thought about it often because, like I said before, I have a hard time relating to the people who don't speak out and who can just stay quiet and feel okay staying quiet, because I don't feel okay staying quiet. Um, I think, I mean, I think I've always just had kind of a rebellious spirit. Like, I've sort of been like this a little bit since I was a kid, where I would get really, really angry about injustice and I would want to do something about it. You know, when things are not fair or not right, it bothers me, and I want to speak about it or fix it or complain about it or take action. Um, and I mean, the other aspect is just that you sort of you sort of have to fake it till you make it. I mean, it's not as though when I started doing these events it didn't scare me. It still scares me. You know, it's not that I don't feel afraid of these protesters. I do feel afraid of them, and that's, you know, I won't do an event without private security because I'm afraid that something will happen to me. Um and and when I first started doing events, I felt scared of public speaking. I still don't like public speaking. You know, it's just sort of, it's something that you have to do. I feel that it's something that you have to do. It's my moral obligation to do it. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And you also learn that you can. I mean, it's one of those things where you build confidence by confronting your fears, by doing things that you're afraid of, by challenging yourself, by failing, and then getting back up and keeping keeping going. And I think that a lot of people don't have that experience, so they don't know that they can do it, and they don't know that it'll be okay, and they don't know that they're stronger than they think. Part of that is probably this like cultural problem of coddling that Jonathan Haidt wrote about, where people think that any bad feeling or uncomfortable feeling has to be avoided, where you should be comfortable at all times. You shouldn't feel triggered. And that's not how you build confidence. That's not become how you become a person of substance. That's not how you build character. Building character sounds like this, like, I don't know, old fashioned thing, like where your dad in the 50s or whatever is like, it'll build this shitty thing that you have to do. You should do it because it'll build character. But it does build character. Like, doing hard things does build character, and it makes you like yourself and respect yourself more. There's personal value in it as well as social value. And I learned that through doing it, and by having to go through these like hard things that are still hard for me. Like, I think that maybe people think that I don't feel it. Like, they think, oh, I can't do it, it'll be too stressful for me. And on one hand, I do, like, I am a person who handles stress very well. I'm not a high anxiety person. I luckily don't struggle with mental health issues. But at the same time, it is stressful and it is hard, and it does, and it does hurt when your friends sort of bail on you and abandon you, and or judge you, or when people that say terrible things or untrue things about you on the internet. It's difficult. It's not an easy thing, but you do. I mean, you do learn how to cope, and you sort of, as you do it, and as you mature, and as you build confidence, and as you learn to trust yourself better, you stop taking things quite so personally, and you of course realize that you don't have to be liked by everybody, and it's okay, and it doesn't matter. Maybe some people hate you. Oh, well, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't control how other people feel about you, right?
Yeah. Well, and you want to choose something in your life that matters, right? I mean, you talk about always being somewhat rebellious. I think I've been similar, where when I was a little kid, I was pretty, if they say up, then I go down and I do the opposite of everything. But the issues that you talk about women, about women's spaces, and the trans identity stuff, like, this is a hill that you've chosen, that you're like, I'm dying on this hill. At what moment, what issue or what event or What was it that made you say, I'm dying on this hill. This is it. Doesn't matter if my life, gets shaken up or whatever. This is the one.
Um, I'm not sure if there was one particular moment, but I do, when I did start to think about this issue of gender identity, ideology, and start to speak out about trans activism and women's spaces, it was because the women that I was allied with and supported and working with were under attack. So it was out of a desire to stand up for other women. So here in Vancouver, Vancouver Rape Relief was under attack for their women only policy. And I was I was loyal to them, and I felt defensive of them, and I wanted to stand up against these people who were bullying them and threatening their funding and constantly attacking them and slandering them. When I saw they were doing all this really important work for women, I was like, these are women who are working really, really hard, many of whom are volunteers, to support the women who are some of the women who are suffering the most in Canada, women who are battered women who are prostituted women who are poor women who have nowhere else to go, women who've been raped. And I just found it so appalling that the women who were doing so much were the ones who were under attack. And so I started to look into the issue more, and I was like, I've got to figure this issue out. I've got to get my arguments together. I know that if I speak out about this, I'm going to have to make sure there's no gaps in my argument. And then shortly after that, women in the UK began speaking out about the issue. And we in Canada were presented with Bill C-16, which is Canada's gender identity legislation. So the women in the UK who had started to speak up about gender identity in women's space and speaking out about men having access to these spaces where women are vulnerable, those women were under attack, and I wanted to defend them, and I felt that it was unfair for these women to be under attack and for me not to say anything, just to protect my own neck, just to protect my own job or my own income or whatever. I was like, no, we have to speak out. We can't just throw this woman under the bus. And then once the legislation came about in Canada, I just thought, this is really serious. If we legislate around this, we're in big trouble. And we are in big trouble, that my concerns have come to fruition. Men are being transferred to women's prisons. Men are allowed to access women's change rooms. Vancouver Rape Relief did lose funding for their women-only policy, and I think that they're the only women's shelter in Canada that has maintained a women-only policy. At other women's shelters, they have to tolerate men in those shelters, and women have had to leave shelters because they said, sorry, you got to share a room with this strange, intimidating guy because he says he's a woman. Too bad. You have no rights. And and now we're seeing girls, young women and girls being transitioned in Canada, their bodies ruined for life before they're even able to contend with what that means. I mean, no 14, 15, 16-year-old understands what it means, like what the long-term impacts are of not going through puberty or going on testosterone or cutting off her breasts or getting a hysterectomy. There's really serious things that are happening right now in Canada that are sort of an extension of Bill C-16 and of this ideology taking root. And part of that is because nobody really thought about it and bothered to speak up, aside from a few people, really just a few people. There was myself, Jordan Peterson said something, there was a few other women, there was a Quebec feminist group, and I
Yeah,
just,
it was.
you know, and that's this culture that I complain about in Canada, where we all sit around and politely and watch terrible things happen because we don't want conflict. Like, there's gonna be if you're gonna stand up for something that's wrong, there's probably gonna be you're gonna get pushback.
Yeah.
That's a reality. It's not
Well,
gonna be easy.
I mean, the shocking part to me, just listening to this, is the fact that we are so desensitized to the fact that you're talking about a rape shelter being defunded because they wanted to only have women in it. Like, you understand, like, you're probably desensitized to it too, where that if you go and tell someone that is apathetic to politics, you say, yeah, but it's, are you for defunding rape shelters, or are you against, what are you for? Everyone's going to agree with your position. But it seems like Canadians just fall into that passive, that passive milieu, the way they act. It's really preposterous to me. And to your point, I'm also quite shocked when it comes to kids. I was sitting and watching the new HBO documentary Transhood. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I just watched it the other night, actually.
Oh, really? Okay, so then it's quite. I'm still not used to it. I'm still not desensitized to seeing kids going through that. It still quite shocks me. And the fact is, again, there's this thing where when you're in private with people, I call it like dinner table transparency. When the white picket fence family that's woke on the outside, maybe, when they're in home, they're really honest with each other, right? They'll agree with a Meghan Murphy, but they're not willing to sort of take to the streets like you are. And I think that's a massive problem because there's victims. I mean, these shelters, like you said, the women that go in there, they don't want to go in there, number one. They have to. They've been abused. They're trying to escape. A lot of times it also has to do with, religious aspects, where we know there's a lot of abuse of women in Islam. The need for it is so paramount. So it's quite shocking that so few people are willing to die on that hill with you.
Well, and I mean, we're already lacking in shelter beds. Like you say, if a woman's going to a shelter, it's a last resort. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. She doesn't have a friend's house she can go stay at. She can't go to a family's home. She doesn't have the money to just go, rent another apartment. These women are really stuck. They're in a really bad place. And it's just so appalling to me that anybody would attack that, of all things.
Yeah.
And that Canadians would sit by and be like, oh, well, I don't know, I don't really want to say anything.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
exactly.
It's like, and then claim to be progressive people who care about other people, who care about the well-being of others and care about safety, and they'll maybe speak out about, we've got to protect, trans women from violence. And it's like, what about these like hundreds and thousands of women who are suffering or homeless or trying to escape prostitution or trying to escape an abusive man or trying to recover from sexual abuse and so on and so forth, addiction, mental health issues. It goes on and on and on.
Well, and the other side assumes, I think, they always assume you're a bad actor because even when playing devil's advocate, I've had people say, well, what about trans people that are killed and they're murdered at higher rates and this and that? I mean, yeah, that's bad too. People don't deserve to get abused and murdered and assaulted. I'm anti that as well, right? But it's just they think that in this really tribal way where, you're a TERF, so you hate trans people automatically. And then you're playing defense basically to try and articulate in the most nuanced way possible, and whatever medium you're in to try and do so, that's not the case, that this is a more complicated issue, and that women have fought for their rights for how many years to be able to have their own spaces, to be able to empower themselves. I mean, look at the sports thing. That's another thing that I'm still, somewhat desensitized, where you have situations where, trans athletes destroy the records of young female girls that should be all stars that have scholarship opportunities taken away from them because they can't compete. That's,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean we hate the trans person now. It just means that someone is clearly a gender of people is under attack. So, I mean, it's really crazy to me. And I think Canada, like you said, is really a nexus for all of this. You have the Soji issue, you have the Bill C-16. I think the Bill C-16 was the nexus for it. But, I mean, where do you see this going? Do you think that 5, 10 years from now, you're still going to be at it, trying to fight the good fight?
Um, it's really tough to predict because it's another one of those things where you see regular people coming around, and people saying, this is wrong, this doesn't make sense, and telling you privately, like how upset or concerned they are. I know a lot of parents who are very upset and concerned about Soji. They're sending their kids to school knowing that they're going to be indoctrinated into this ideology and taught this information that really is anti-science. It would be like sending your kid to a school to be indoctrinated into some kind of religion that wasn't your religion. And they're going to, teach, the Immaculate Conception or something like that. These little kids are going to school and being told that sometimes a boy is actually a girl and you should look for clues that he might be a girl, which I think is incredibly sexist because those clues are things like, does he like to play with girls more than boys? Does he want to play with the dolls? Does he have long hair? Does he like girly clothes? And being taught that everybody has a gender identity, and which is something that I think is garbage. I don't think that gender identity is a real thing. I mean, there's no material basis for a gender identity. I don't have a gender identity. I'm a woman and I have a personality. It's my personality. Some of that has probably been impacted by socialization into femininity. Some of it is just hardwired. Some of it is upbringing. Some of it is peers. There's all sorts of factors. But regardless of how my personality has come to be, whatever it is, which is not, in all ways a very feminine personality. Like, I'm a pretty, dominant person, I'm not exactly, a passive person. And that doesn't change anything about my sex. And, so parents are really concerned about this and they don't really know what to do because it's sort of so far gone. And so we're in this tough position where regular people don't know what they can do. They feel kind of helpless when these ideas have been institutionalized, when, schools and our politicians are against us, as it were. I've tried many times to have these conversations with politicians only to be dismissed or ignored. Right now in Canada, we're facing Bill C-6, which will criminalize conversion therapy, but they've lumped in gender identity with sexual orientation. So what it effectively means is that it'll criminalize therapists or medical practitioners who would take the watchful waiting approach as opposed to the affirmative model, which is where, if a child shows up and announces they're female, but they're actually a boy, or they're trans or whatever, you can't ask questions. You just have to rush them through. You just have to give them puberty blockers. You have to put them on hormones. And if you ask questions, you get accused of transphobia. And that's really dangerous. And yet, the vast, vast, vast majority of politicians are on board. And they don't seem interested in our critiques. They don't seem interested in wanting to hear it. They just think, oh, well, this will make me look good if I vote for it or support it. Or maybe they actually do think that it's helping whatever so-called trans kids. And, the debate really isn't happening and the media isn't helping because the media also pretends that the debate isn't there and that there's no problem and that you just have to take the rah, rah, rah trans approach to any of these issues and questions. And again, if you question, if you criticize, if you challenge, you hate trans people, you're transphobic, so on and so forth.
Well, it's almost interesting that it sounds like it's almost more respectable in terms of speaking to someone who is on the other side and says, you know what, I believe in trans kids and all that. That's my position. It's like, at least they have a position. At least they vote on a position. You may not agree with it. I don't think I agree with it. But I think that mushy middle is what Canada is. It's the mushy middle where if the wind is blowing that way, that's the way they're going to go. And politicians certainly will glance at a bill and approve it or sign it. But I mean, a final question would be this, and I want to end it on a high note, on a positive note.
Okay.
If there's a young girl, if there's a woman who is a teenager who is going into college or university and is concerned about these issues, what would your message to her be? Like, what would you tell the new generation of young women who want to be feminists? They don't want to be, the super out there kind. They want to be the good kind. And what do you tell her? What do you tell her about what's going on, about women's spaces, about what they need to do? Do they need to do what you did?
I think that there's a couple things. One is that you can't just live your life in fear. So you can't go through life being afraid of what other people will say and what other people think. That's oppressive. You worry about oppression, but it feels incredibly oppressive to have no voice and to not be able to speak your truth. And to not be able to stand up and speak out when you see something happening that is wrong. And, I think that especially when we're younger, we're very dependent on our peer groups and we're very concerned about what other people think. But, I think that when you do speak out, it is scary. You probably will lose friends. People might say mean things to you or say mean things about you. But I think that's part of a process of sort of finding your tribe also, of finding people that you can be yourself around and you can speak your truth and who appreciate that you're brave and that you're bold and you make choices based on what is the right thing to do and what's ethical rather than based on approval from people around you who you probably don't respect or you should not have any respect for anyway. I mean, I don't have very much respect for the kinds of people who will just watch and go along with these terrible things, just observe as people's lives are ruined, as society is destroyed and say nothing. You want to be around people who are better than that, who are stronger than that, and again, who will respect you, even if you end up disagreeing. It doesn't have to be you find people who just agree with everything you say. I mean, how boring would that be? Like, I like to be challenged. I like to, learn new things and have new perspectives and ideas presented to me. I really like changing my mind about things, and I'm sort of confused about why so many people seem so afraid to change their minds, and I want to be like, it's great, you should try it. Like, learn something new, hear from different people. But people who will treat you with respect, even if you disagree, even if you don't see things in exactly the same way, and maybe you'll learn something from one another.
Meghan, I'm really happy we got to do this. I really appreciate it. I think we need to do it again. Thank you so much for coming on. It was great.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to. It was really great to talk to you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. That was Meghan Murphy. She has her own podcast called The Same Drugs. I highly recommend it. She has a YouTube channel, which is just her name, Meghan Murphy, as well as a Facebook page, which is also Meghan Murphy. She does not have a Twitter page. There's a whole drama around that. But, who has Twitter anyways these days? Please support her work. She's doing really, really amazing work. If you like what we're doing and you're watching on Facebook, please subscribe, please like, please share. If you're listening to my voice, that means you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please consider following and tell your friends. It really helps us out. Until next time, thank you.